Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We've got some really thought-provoking articles about MLK's legacy for you.
And how it speaks to anyone feeling disillusioned with politics today.
Oh yeah, especially after the 2024 election. I think a lot of people are feeling that way.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot to process.
For sure. But what's interesting is these articles, they don't just talk about MLK's dream. They get into some really practical advice
Almost like a guidebook for navigating difficult times.
from a master strategist.
Exactly. And that's what makes his approach so relevant, even more so now than ever, I'd say.
Oh, absolutely. In our hyper-partisan world where everyone's yelling at each other, it's like, how do you even make progress?
Right, and that's where MLK's methods really stand out. They were ahead of their time in so many ways.
Okay, so one article starts with this incredible story about MLK during the Montgomery bus boycott.
Back in '56.
Yeah, he's only 27 years old at the time.
Can you imagine facing that kind of pressure?
No way.
Yeah.
Getting death threats,
Yeah.
leading a movement. I mean, talk about a trial by fire.
And it's a powerful reminder that even icons of courage experience moments of fear and doubt. I mean, he was putting everything on the line.
Makes you realize he was human too,
Yeah.
you know? Not just this untouchable figure.
Absolutely. And those moments of uncertainty, I think they're actually part of what makes his story so powerful.
Because it means we can relate to it.
Exactly. We all face challenges and setbacks. It's how we respond that defines us.
Okay, so speaking of challenges, the article mentions this intense moment for MLK, almost a crisis of faith that shaped his whole approach.
Oh yeah, during the bus boycott, things got really scary for him.
Like facing real danger, not just theoretical threats.
And it forced him to grapple with this question. How do you fight for justice when the odds seem impossible?
And out of that struggle, he developed some truly profound insights.
It's insights that are even more relevant today, I think.
So the article pulls out 4 specific lessons we can learn from how MLK navigated that crisis.
Lessons that can help us navigate the challenges we're facing right now.
All right, I'm ready. Hit me with lesson number 1.
Okay, so the first one is about rejecting that whole good versus evil narrative that's so pervasive today.
Oh man, that's everywhere these days. It's like everyone's convinced they're on the right side and the other side is just evil.
And that kind of thinking shuts down any possibility of dialogue or understanding.
Yeah, it's like we're all retreating to our corners, convinced we have the moral high ground.
Exactly. And MLK, he saw that this kind of thinking was a trap, both morally and strategically.
Wait, hold on. So he's getting death threats, facing constant opposition, and he's choosing not to demonize his opponents.
It might seem counterintuitive, but that's where his genius comes in. He understood that people are complex. He refused to reduce them to caricatures.
But how do you do that? Especially when you're facing such intense hatred and violence.
It takes incredible strength and discipline. But MLK, he had this famous saying, "Let no man pull you so low as to hate him."
Wow, that's powerful.
And I think it gets to the heart of his approach. By refusing to play that good versus evil game, he created space for dialogue, for persuasion.
So it wasn't just about being the better person. It was about being more effective in creating change.
Precisely. And that leads us to the second lesson, which builds on this idea. MLK understood that for a movement to be truly successful, it had to connect to broader issues, not just focus solely on racial grievances.
That's interesting because some of the articles talk about the challenges faced by movements like Black Lives Matter.
And even the Poor People's Campaign, they faced pushback when their message was perceived as being solely about one group's grievances.
So it sounds like MLK saw this dynamic playing out even back then.
He did. He knew that framing social justice movements as a zero-sum game where one group's gain is seen as another's loss inevitably leads to backlash.
So what did he do differently?
He brilliantly connected systemic racism to issues that affect everyone: poverty, economic inequality, militarism. He understood that these problems are interconnected.
So by broadening the scope, he was actually able to build a more powerful movement.
Exactly. And by highlighting those connections, he made it much harder to dismiss the movement as something that only concerned Black people.
That's such a smart strategy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got reject simplistic narratives, build broader coalitions. What's next?
This one's really important in our social media age.
Okay, lay it on me.
Hashtag activism, while it can raise awareness, isn't enough on its own.
I can see that.
Right.
It's easy to tweet from our couches, but are we willing to put our bodies on the line the way MLK did?
That's the question, isn't it? And one of the articles makes this fascinating comparison between the power of MLK's letter from Birmingham jail and the limitations of online activism today.
It's a great point. Imagine if King had just posted that letter on social media, would it have had the same impact?
Hard to say. But there's this quote from activist Amber Ali Frost that really struck me. She says, "A desperate activist tweets, an aspiring activist uses Facebook. A successful organizer is offered addresses."
Oof, that's a call to action right there.
It is. It's about recognizing that real change requires more than just online engagement. It requires showing up in person, building relationships, taking risks.
And that's something that Diane Nash, another key figure in the civil rights movement, really emphasized.
She talked about how it's foolhardy to think you can go against the system as an individual.
You need that collective power.
Exactly. You need that cosmic companionship that we'll talk more about later.
Okay, so we've got ditch the good versus evil trap, connect broader issues, and get out there and take action. What's lesson number 4?
This one might be the toughest one to swallow, especially after the 2024 election result.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's about understanding that success isn't solely defined by elections.
Okay, I was not expecting that.
Yeah, it's a tough one to grapple with, especially when it feels like so much is riding on those elections.
Absolutely. I mean, after the 2024 results, a lot of people are feeling pretty disillusioned.
Right, and it's easy to fall into despair when your candidate loses or when policies you believe in are overturned.
Yeah, you can feel like all that work, all that hope just went down the drain.
But MLK's life teaches us something really important. The fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint.
Okay, I get that.
Mm.
But how do you stay motivated when it feels like you're constantly hitting roadblocks?
It's a great question. And I think part of the answer lies in tapping into that sense of what MLK called cosmic companionship.
Cosmic companionship.
Okay.
That sounds pretty out there.
I know it sounds a little woo-woo, but bear with me. It's this idea that we're part of something bigger than ourselves, a movement that spans generations.
Okay. I think it's starting to see where you're going with this.
It's about recognizing that our individual efforts, however small they may seem, are part of a much larger tapestry.
So even if we don't see immediate results, our actions still matter.
Exactly. Think about Diane Nash again. She faced constant setbacks, arrests, threats, imprisonment while she was pregnant.
Oh, wow. I can't even imagine.
But she never gave up because there was too much at stake, as she put it.
Her story is incredible.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope.
And that hope is fueled by that sense of connection to something larger than ourselves.
To that cosmic companionship.
You got it. It's what gives us the strength to keep going even when the odds seem insurmountable.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of rejecting that good versus evil binary and connecting social justice to broader issues. But how do we actually put those lessons into practice?
That's where things get really interesting. It's about getting strategic and creative about how we approach social change.
Okay, I'm listening.
So let's start with that first lesson, ditching the good versus evil mentality.
Easier said than done, right?
It definitely takes conscious effort. It means breaking free from those echo chambers we all tend to get stuck in.
Oh, I know I'm guilty of that too.
Yeah.
It's so easy to surround yourself with people who already agree with you.
Right, but the challenge is to actively seek out diverse perspectives, especially if they make us uncomfortable.
Okay, but how do you even begin to have those conversations without it turning into a shouting match?
Well, that's where MLK's commitment to nonviolence and respectful dialogue becomes a model. Remember, he was dealing with people who literally wanted him dead.
And he still chose to engage with them.
He did. He always sought to find common ground to appeal to their humanity.
Wow, that's a pretty high bar to set for ourselves.
It is.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's not about pretending we agree or ignoring our differences.
It's about finding a way to engage in a way that's both honest and respectful.
Exactly. And that requires a certain level of humility, acknowledging that we might not have all the answers, and that we can learn from those who see the world differently.
Okay, that makes sense for the first lesson.
Mm-hmm.
But what about connecting social justice to broader issues? How do you do that in a way that resonates with people who might not see those connections?
That's where the art of storytelling and framing become incredibly important. Instead of just throwing facts and figures at people, we need to humanize the issues.
I like that. Humanize the issues.
We need to tell stories that connect with people's emotions, their hopes, and their fears.
Can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Sure, take the issue of climate change. Instead of just talking about rising sea levels and carbon emissions, we can talk about the real-world impact on people's lives.
Like how it's affecting farmers struggling with droughts or coastal communities facing displacement.
Exactly. By making it personal, by showing how it affects real people, we can make it harder to ignore.
I see what you mean. It's not just an abstract problem anymore. It's something that's affecting our neighbors, our communities.
Right. And by connecting climate change to issues like economic inequality, public health, and national security, we can start to build a broader coalition for action.
Okay, so we've talked about respectful dialogue and building those broader connections.
Yeah.
What about lesson number 3? How do we move beyond hashtag activism and actually make a tangible difference?
This is where we need to get strategic and creative. It's about identifying the most effective levers for change and then organizing collective action around those levers.
But with so many issues vying for our attention, how do we even begin to prioritize? It's easy to feel overwhelmed and not know where to start.
You're right, it can feel that way. And there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It requires us to consider our own passions or skills or resources, and also what our communities need most.
So it's about finding our own unique way to contribute based on our own circumstances and what we care about most.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And remember, collective action doesn't always have to be on a grand scale. It can start with small local initiatives that build momentum and inspire others to get involved.
So even small actions can make a difference.
Absolutely. It's like that saying, think globally, act locally. You don't have to solve all the world's problems at once, but you can make a difference in your own community.
Okay, that's actually pretty encouraging. It makes you realize that you don't have to be a superhero to make a difference.
Exactly. It's about building a movement from the ground up, one conversation, one action, one community at a time.
This has been really helpful so far. But what about that final lesson? The idea that success isn't solely defined by elections. How do we hold on to hope and motivation when the political landscape feels so discouraging, especially after a tough election?
That's where we need to remember that feeling overwhelmed or helpless is exactly what those in power want.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
MLK understood this. His approach reminds us that even when things feel chaotic, we have the power to choose hope, to choose strategy, and to choose action.
So it's about focusing on what we can control rather than getting bogged down in what we can't.
You're getting it. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day ups and downs, but we need to zoom out and take a longer view.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
But how do we stay connected to that feeling when we're constantly bombarded with negative news and cynicism? It's easy to get pulled into that vortex of despair.
You're right. It's a constant battle. And that's why finding your own version of cosmic companionship becomes essential. It's about nurturing those things that bring you joy, that connect you to something larger than yourself.
Okay, so what does that look like in real life?
It can be anything. Spending time in nature, connecting with like-minded individuals, finding solace in art or music, or drawing inspiration from history and literature.
So basically anything that lifts you up and reminds you why you're in this fight.
That's it. It's about actively cultivating those sources of hope and resilience, not just waiting for them to magically appear.
This is making me think about that quote we mentioned earlier about MLK and optimism.
Oh, yeah, the one from his biographer, Taylor Branch.
Exactly. It's so powerful. If King could maintain optimism in his era, so can we.
I think about that quote a lot, especially when things feel really tough.
Because, let's be real, MLK faced far greater obstacles than most of us can even imagine.
Absolutely. Open segregation, widespread violence, a government actively working against him. Talk about an uphill battle.
And yet, he never gave up on the possibility of a better future.
His life is a testament to the power of hope and the importance of never losing sight of that long-term vision.
So even when we face setbacks and disappointments, we can choose to respond with resilience and determination.
Precisely. And that's what this final lesson from MLK is all about. It's not about being naive or ignoring the very real challenges we face.
It's about choosing hope as a deliberate act.
As a way to fuel our commitment to action.
So if we were to distill everything we've discussed down to one key takeaway, what would it be? What's the essence of what MLK can teach us today?
That's a good question. I think it comes down to this. Even in a world that feels increasingly divided and chaotic, we have the power to choose hope, strategy, and action.
And by embodying those choices,
By engaging in respectful dialogue, connecting social justice to broader issues, taking real-world action, and maintaining a long-term vision.
we contribute to a ripple effect that creates a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. It might sound idealistic.
But it's also incredibly empowering.
It reminds us that we're not powerless. We have agency. We can make a difference.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive today.
What a journey.
It really has been. We've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully you found this exploration of MLK's legacy as insightful and inspiring as we did.
It's been a privilege to dive into this with you.
Likewise. And to everyone listening, remember, the fight for a better world starts with each of us and the choices we make every single day. Go out there and be the change you wish to see in the world.